The positive pregnancy test burned like a branding iron in my coat pocket. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, the sky was tearing itself apart in a torrential downpour, the lightning briefly illuminating the cold, minimalist luxury of Victor Romano's world. I stood in the darkened hallway, a 25-year-old trauma surgeon whose hands usually never shook, feeling my pulse hammer relentlessly against my throat. How did I get here? It was a question I had asked myself 100 times since that chaotic night at the underground clinic. I had pulled 3 bullets out of Victor's chest, saving the life of New York's most notorious Mafia boss. In return, he had slowly, methodically carved his way into my solitary life. I thought I had seen past the blood and the tailored suits. I thought I had seen the man underneath. And when the nausea started last week, a foolish, naive part of my brain actually dared to hope that we could be a family, something I had never had. Taking a deep breath, I stepped closer to the heavy mahogany doors of his private study. I raised my knuckle to knock to tell him that he was going to be a father. But before my hand could make contact, a deafening crash echoed from inside. It sounded like a crystal vase shattering against marble. Then came his voice. Not the low, seductive whisper that had coaxed me into his bed, but the raw, brutal roar of an apex predator out for blood. "Kill it?" I said. "Kill it right now." Victor bellowed, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated panic and rage. "Chop it to pieces. I want it dead. Do you hear me?" My hand froze in midair. The blood drained from my face so fast the world tilted on its axis. Another crash. The sound of heavy boots scrambling across the hardwood floor. His lieutenants, usually so composed, were shouting in chaos. "It is moving, boss, watch out, the disgusting thing is flying," one of the men yelled. "I do not care," Victor roared back, his voice vibrating with absolute disgust. "Do not let a single seed of that repulsive thing survive in this house. Get the chemical spray, melt it down. If it breathes, you are all dead. Disgusting thing, repulsive seed, melt it down." The words did not just hit me, they eviscerated me. My medical mind, usually so rational, short-circuited. He knew. Somehow, the underground network, his doctors, his spies, they had found out about the pregnancy before I could tell him. And this was his verdict. A mafia boss did not want a vulnerability. He did not want a bastard child with a no-name doctor. In that freezing hallway, I was not a respected surgeon anymore. I was suddenly 7 years old again, standing in the filthy kitchen of my 3rd foster home, listening to my foster father tell the social worker that I was an unwanted burden, a parasite they needed to get rid of. I remembered the basement. I remembered the dark. I instinctively wrapped both arms protectively around my flat stomach. A physical, visceral pain ripped through my chest. He wanted to chop it to pieces. He wanted to erase my baby's existence like it was nothing more than a stain on his perfect Italian marble. "Run." The voice in my head was sharp, overriding the heartbreak with pure adrenaline-fueled survival instinct. As a surgeon, I knew how to amputate a dying limb to save the whole body. Right now, Victor Romano was the dying limb. I did not make a sound as I backed away from the mahogany doors. I did not pack the expensive clothes he had bought me. I did not take the Rolex on the nightstand. I walked out of the penthouse, took the elevator down to the underground garage, and stepped out into the freezing New York rain with nothing but the clothes on my back, my medical license, and a fiercely broken heart. In the span of 2 hours, I became a ghost. I withdrew all my emergency cash, tossed my cell phone into the East River, and boarded the first Amtrak train heading north as far away from the Mafia's grip as possible. Now, sitting in the dimly lit carriage of the night train, the rhythmic rolling sound of the wheels over the iron tracks felt like a twisted lullaby. The rain slashed violently against the dirty window pane, distorting the city lights into blurry streaks of yellow and red. I looked down at my hands. They were finally steady. I slowly unbuttoned my wet coat and pressed my warm palms directly against my lower abdomen. It was completely flat, revealing nothing of the tiny, invisible universe growing inside me. "It is just you and me, little one," I whispered into the empty carriage, my voice thick with unshed tears, but anchored by an ironclad resolve. "I know it is scary, but I swear on my life you will never be a burden. You will never be unwanted. I will be your shield, your father, and your mother. He will never find us." The train wailed as it plunged deeper into the night, carrying me toward a foggy, forgotten coastal town in Maine called Havenbrook. I closed my eyes, leaving Victor Romano and his empire of blood behind forever. I did not know it then, but hundreds of miles behind me, the The terrifying Mafia Don I was fleeing from was currently standing on his custom-made Italian leather sofa, clutching a can of bug spray like a lifeline trembling over the squashed remains of a single unfortunate cockroach. 4 years is a long time to build a fortress, but a remarkably short time to forget what you are hiding from. Havenbrook, Maine was a postcard of a town permanently blanketed in a salty ocean mist and smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It was a place where people came to disappear. I had spent the last 48 months transforming from a terrified fugitive into Dr. Julian Hayes, the reliable, mildly sleep-deprived physician at the local clinic. But my greatest achievement was not the clinic. It was sitting on the examination table right now, swinging his short legs and aggressively coloring a picture of a blue dinosaur. "Daddy, look, T-Rex is eating the bad guys," Leo announced proudly, thrusting the crayon masterpiece into my face. I smiled my heart, doing that familiar, painful little flip it did every time I looked at him. Leo was 3 years old, a whirlwind of boundless energy, chaotic curls, and a terrifyingly sharp intelligence. He was the son my entire universe revolved around. Every late-night shift, every moment of lingering paranoia, every sacrifice, it was all worth it the moment he called me daddy. "That is a very fierce T-Rex, buddy," I said, tapping his nose. "Now stay here while I organize these patient files." "Okay." It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The clinic was empty, the ticking of the wall clock, the only sound accompanying the distant crash of the Atlantic waves. It was peaceful, perfect. Then the floorboards vibrated. It was not a subtle shift. It was the low, synchronized rumble of high-powered engines disrupting the quiet coastal street. I frowned, stepping toward the front window, wiping away the condensation with my sleeve. My breath caught in my throat. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. 3 matte black, armor-plated Cadillac Escalades had sealed off the street in front of the clinic. The doors opened in unison, and half a dozen men in dark suits stepped out, securing the perimeter with the cold, practiced efficiency of a military strike team. No. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed its way up my chest. My medical degree, my rational mind, all of it vanished, leaving only the primal terror of a hunted animal. He had found us. After 4 years of looking over my shoulder, the ghost of New York had finally tracked me down to this forgotten corner of the world. The little bell above the clinic door chimed. It sounded like a death knell. He stepped inside. Victor Romano seemed to absorb all the light in the sterile room. He was broader than I remembered his monolithic frame, clad in a bespoke charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more dangerous. The silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow was a stark reminder of his violent world, and his dark eyes swept the room with the lethal precision of an apex predator locking on to its prey. The air pressure in the room plummeted. The sheer overwhelming aura of the Mafia boss filled every corner of my small sanctuary. He was here to finish the job. He was here to execute the mincing order I had heard that rainy night. "Daddy." Leo's small voice broke the suffocating silence. He had stopped coloring. Instinct took over. In a fraction of a second, I lunged forward, sweeping Leo off the examination table and shoving him forcefully behind my legs. I stood tall, using my own body as a human shield, my hands gripping the edge of a steel medical tray. If Victor wanted my son, he would have to carve his way through my dead body first. "Stay back!" I hissed, my voice trembling despite my desperate attempt to sound brave. "Do not you dare come near him, Victor." Victor froze. His dark eyes darted from my pale, terrified face to the tiny curly-haired boy peeking out from behind my knees. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The silence was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight crushing my lungs. I braced myself for him to pull a weapon to signal his men. But Leo, my brave, foolish, beautiful boy, had other plans. Before I could stop him, Leo wriggled past my legs. He marched right up to the terrifying mob boss, clutching his bright yellow plastic Excalibur sword. He pointed the rounded tip directly at Victor's Italian leather shoes. "Leave my daddy alone, you giant monster!" Leo shouted, his high-pitched voice echoing in the tense room. My heart stopped. He is going to kill us. Victor stared down at the tiny, defiant boy. I watched, paralyzed, as a strange spasm crossed the Mafia boss's hardened features. The lethal aura, the terrifying presence that made New York's underworld tremble. It all suddenly shattered like fragile glass. Victor slowly dropped to one knee, bringing himself down to Leo's eye level. His massive hands that had built an empire of blood, began to tremble violently. He reached into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket. I tensed, ready to throw myself over Leo to take the bullet. But he did not pull out a gun. With shaking hands, the Don of the Romano family pulled out a thick, violently dog-eared paperback book. The cover was faded, but I could clearly read the title, What to Expect When You Are Expecting. The book was practically held together by duct tape and hundreds of colorful sticky notes. Victor looked at me, his dark eyes wide raw and completely stripped of his Mafia armor. Victor's voice cracked, the ruthless killer stuttered, sounding like a panicked teenager. Julian, I have been looking for you for 4 years. The book says his digestive system is developing. He swallowed hard, looking desperately at the plastic sword-wielding toddler, then back at me. As the baby switched to stage 3 formula milk, yet I bought the organic kind, but I was not sure. I stood there, my hands still hovering defensively in the air, staring at the terrifying Mafia boss who was currently kneeling on my linoleum floor, crying over baby formula. My brain completely flatlined. The clinic was so quiet, you could hear the Atlantic waves crashing a mile away. I stared at the terrifying Mafia Don kneeling on my floor, clutching a parenting book like it was a holy relic. Formula. I echoed the word, feeling utterly alien on my tongue. You tracked me across the country for 4 years with a fleet of armored SUVs to ask about formula milk. Victor looked down at the dog-eared book, then back up at me. His expression caught somewhere between overwhelming relief and absolute terror. And diapers. He added, his voice raspy. The book says potty training should start around 2, but I did not know if he was a late bloomer, and I did not want to buy the wrong size pull-ups. And stop. I held up a hand, my brain physically hurting from the sheer whiplash. I pulled Leo behind me again, not out of fear this time, but because I needed a barrier between myself and this surreal reality. Victor, what is going on? The night I left, I heard you. Victor blinked slowly, standing up. He towered over me, but his posture was completely defensive. Heard me? Outside your study. You were screaming at your men. My voice shook as the memory clawed its way to the surface. The pain of that night was still a raw, bleeding wound. You ordered them to kill it, to chop it to pieces. You said you did not want any seed of that repulsive thing surviving in your house. I watched, waiting for the cold confirmation, waiting for the Mafia boss to admit his cruelty. Instead, Victor's face went completely blank. Then the blood drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. Julian, Victor choked out, running a large, scarred hand over his face. Did you think I was talking about the baby? What else would you be talking about? I snapped, my defensive walls crumbling into pure frustration. A cockroach. Julian A. Flying mutated ungodly cockroach. Victor yelled, his voice echoing in the small clinic. He gestured wildly, his Mafia composure entirely gone. It flew out of the air vent. It was the size of a Buick. It tried to land on my face. I am terrified of them, Julian. I told the boys to burn the room down if they had to. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at him. I replayed the memory in my head. Kill it. It is moving. It is flying. A bug, I whispered, my voice cracking. I gave up my life, fled New York, changed my identity, and lived in constant fear for 4 years because you saw a bug. I have severe bladydiophobia. Victor defended himself, looking genuinely distressed. It is a documented medical condition, Julian, I swear on my life. If I had known you were pregnant, I would have given you the world. I would not have let you walk out that door. I looked at Victor. I looked at the battered parenting book in his massive hand. I looked at Leo, who was currently poking Victor's shiny leather shoe with his plastic sword. A hysterical bubble of laughter built up in my chest. It was absurd. It was tragic. It was the most ridiculous misunderstanding in the history of the criminal underworld. You are an idiot, I breathed out, leaning back against the examination table as the remaining adrenaline left my body. I am. Victor agreed immediately. He took a hesitant step forward. Julian, let me make it right. Let me be a father. He did not force me to return to New York. Instead, the very next day, a team of terrifying men in suits arrived and bought the large rustic log cabin right next to my small house, paying triple the asking price in cash. The Don of the Romano family had officially moved to Havenbrook, and that was when the real chaos began. Victor's approach to parenting was completely unhinged. He applied the extreme high-stakes methodology of running a mafia empire to the delicate task of raising a toddler. One morning, I walked into my kitchen to find Victor preparing Leo's breakfast. He was wearing a pink floral apron over a custom Italian shirt. In his hand was a military-grade tactical combat knife. He was holding a banana hostage, eyeing it with lethal precision before slicing it into perfectly uniform millimeter-exact pieces. "Victor, it is a banana, not an assassination target," I sighed, pouring myself coffee. "Consistency is key in a child's diet," Julian, Victor replied, deadpan wiping the combat knife on a dish towel. "The book says irregular shapes can pose a choking hazard. I leave nothing to chance." Later that week, I took Leo to the local park. Victor naturally trailed 10 feet behind us, scanning the playground like a Secret Service agent protecting the president. When a rather aggressive 5-year-old tried to snatch Leo's bucket from the sandbox, Victor did not intervene physically. He simply stood by the fence, lowered his sunglasses, and gave the 5-year-old the death glare, the exact same look he used to break hardened criminals during interrogations. The poor kid dropped the bucket, burst into tears, and sprinted back to his mother. "Did you really just intimidate a kindergartner?" I asked, suppressing a smile. "I neutralized a threat to my heir's property," Victor corrected, adjusting his sunglasses. Despite the absurdity, the walls around my heart hardened by years of trauma and foster care slowly began to crack. Victor was intense, ridiculous, and completely out of his element, but he was trying. He was trying so desperately hard. He attended every single one of my night shifts at the clinic, sitting in the waiting room, reading fairy tales out loud to practice his bedtime voice, which still sounded like a mob boss ordering a hit, but Leo loved it. The turning point happened 3 weeks later. Leo was trying to reach a jar of cookies on the high counter. He wobbled on the stool, lost his balance, and fell. Before I could even gasp, Victor moved with terrifying, preternatural speed. He dove across the kitchen, catching Leo securely in his massive arms just inches before the toddler hit the floor. Leo blinked, looked up at the scarred, terrifying man holding him, and broke into a massive grin. "Giant Vic," Leo cheered, wrapping his tiny arms around Victor's thick neck. Victor froze. The man who controlled New York's underworld looked down at the child clinging to him. A slow, shuddering breath escaped his lips, and I saw tears pool in his dark eyes. He hugged Leo back, burying his face in my son's curly hair, completely unraveling right there on my kitchen floor. That afternoon, I found out Victor had called his lieutenants in New York. He did not order a hit. He ordered his entire heavily armed Mafia syndicate to volunteer at a local soup kitchen for 3 days to celebrate the Don's new title. I leaned against the kitchen door frame, watching Victor meticulously measure out Leo's formula with the precision of a bomb technician. For the first time in my life, looking at this terrifying, bug-fearing mobster, I realized I was not scared anymore. I was home. Summer in Havenbrook was usually a gentle affair, a soft blend of sea breeze and warm sunlight filtering through the pine trees. But the air that Tuesday afternoon felt heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I was at the clinic organizing medical supplies while Leo was playing in the small garden out back under Victor's watchful eye. It had been 2 months since Victor moved next door. 2 months of him terrifying the local parent-teacher association, burning pancakes, and slowly, irrevocably becoming the father Leo adored. But Victor Romano was not a man built for peace. He was a man forged in violence, and violence has a way of leaving a scent that never truly washes off. I heard the clinic bell chime, but there was no friendly greeting from Mrs. Higgins dropping off her blood pressure medications. Instead, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. I wiped my hands and stepped out of the supply room. "Hello, how can I help you?" The words died in my throat. 4 men stood in the waiting room. They were not from Havenbrook. They wore cheap suits that bulged at the waist, and their eyes had that dead, flat look I had only ever seen in the trauma ward in New York, the look of men who killed for a living. The man in the front, a wiry guy with a jagged scar across his chin, smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Dr. Hayes, I presume," the man said, his voice grating like crushed glass. "Or should I call you Julian? It took a lot of money and a lot of broken fingers back in the city to track down the Don's missing little pet." My blood ran cold. The Barone family, the rival syndicate Victor had supposedly dismantled before coming here. They had not come for Victor. They had come for his weakness. They had come for us. Instinct sharpened by years of hiding flared instantly. I slowly moved my hand toward the emergency panic button under the reception desk. "I think you have the wrong clinic. Please leave." "We are not leaving without the kid doc." The man sneered, pulling a suppressed pistol from his jacket. "Bring him out. Nice and easy. We just want to send Romano a little message." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Leo. He was in the garden. He was out there. Before I could press the button, the front window of the clinic exploded inward. A hail of shattered glass rained down as a massive, dark figure crashed through the window. It happened so fast, my brain could not process the movement. It was not the bumbling, overprotective father who wore a floral apron and meticulously measured formula. This was the apex predator. This was the dawn. Victor landed silently amidst the broken glass. His eyes were completely black, devoid of any warmth or humanity. The temperature in the room plummeted. The 4 hitmen turned, raising their weapons, but they were too slow. Victor moved with a terrifying, lethal grace that was beautiful and horrifying all at once. He did not use a gun. He used his bare hands. In seconds, he disarmed the first man, twisting his wrist with a sickening sound of breaking bone before driving a knee into his chest. The second man fired a wild shot that hit the ceiling. Victor grabbed him by the throat and slammed his head into the brick wall with a sickening, heavy sound. The remaining 2 tried to run, but Victor was already on them, a phantom of pure, calculating rage. I stood frozen behind the reception desk, my hands clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. I was a surgeon. I spent my life saving people, stitching bodies back together. Now I was watching the man I loved tear them apart. When the silence finally returned to the clinic, broken only by the groans of the incapacitated men on the floor, Victor stood breathing heavily. There was blood on his knuckles, blood on his expensive shirt. He looked down at the hitman with the scarred chin who was gasping for air. "You came for my family," Victor whispered, a sound so cold it made my spine snap straight. "Tell Barone he is dead. I am coming for him tonight." Victor turned to look at me. The monster in his eyes receded, replaced instantly by panic when he saw my pale face. "Julian, are you hurt? Did they touch you?" He took a step toward me, reaching out with his bloodied hands. I flinched. It was an involuntary reaction, a reflex driven by fear, but the movement hit Victor harder than a bullet. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at his hands, then at the destruction he had caused, and finally at the terror in my eyes. "I will secure the perimeter," Victor said, his voice entirely hollow. "Stay with Leo." He turned and walked out of the back door without looking back. That night, a violent storm rolled into Havenbrook. The rain lashed against the windows of my house, the thunder rattling the floorboards. Leo was asleep in his bed, clutching his T-Rex, blissfully unaware of the monsters that had visited our town. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the wall. The image of Victor's ruthless efficiency replayed in my mind. He had protected us. He had saved Leo. But it forced me to confront the reality I had been ignoring while we played house. Victor Romano was a killer. The world he belonged to was bathed in blood. How could I raise a child in the shadow of a Mafia empire? How long until the next hit squad arrived? The urge to run, the same urge that had driven me onto that night train 4 years ago, began to claw at my chest. Around 2 in the morning, the roar of Victor's vehicle cut through the storm. He was back. The Barone problem had been handled. I watched through the living room window. Victor stepped out of his car into the pouring rain. He was soaked, his clothes dark and heavy. He walked slowly toward my house, but he did not come up to the porch. He stopped in the middle of the yard, standing under the torrential downpour. He looked up at my dark window. The street lamp caught the exhaustion in his posture, the slump of his broad shoulders. He was an incredibly powerful man, a king in his own brutal world. But right now, standing in the rain with blood on his hands, he just looked utterly devastatingly alone. He did not dare come inside. He believed he was too dirty, too monstrous to step into the light he had fought so hard to protect. My heart broke. I gripped the windowsill, the fear of his world warring violently with the undeniable, desperate love I felt for the man standing in the storm. I gripped the windowsill so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was a battleground. One half of me was still reeling from the cold, ruthless efficiency of the man who had just dismantled 4 armed hitmen in my clinic. The other half was screaming, aching for the man currently shivering under the torrential Maine rain. I had spent my entire life trying to be clean. I was the trauma surgeon, the man who stitched wounds and saved lives. Victor Romano was the man who created them. That discrepancy had been my shield, the reason I ran, the reason I kept my heart behind a vault of iron. But watching him standing there, his head bowed, soaking wet and utterly alone, the shield felt less like a protection and more like a cage. The front door creaked. I spun around, my breath catching. Leo was standing there, his curly hair tousled, his small feet bare on the hardwood floor. He was clutching his yellow plastic frog raincoat in one hand and his favorite tiny bright blue umbrella in the other. "Leo, honey, what are you doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He did not look at me. His eyes were fixed on the window, his gaze filled with an intuitive, heartbreaking empathy that children possess and adults spend their whole lives trying to unlearn. Giant Vic is sad, Daddy. He is wet and he is lonely. Leo, no. But he was already moving. He was a force of nature, a 3-year-old on a mission of mercy. He pushed past me, his small hands working the latches of the front door with practiced ease. "Leo, wait." I followed him out onto the porch. The cold rain hit me instantly, soaking through my thin shirt, but I did not care. I watched as my son, wearing his ridiculous, oversized frog raincoat that snapped loudly in the wind, waddled out into the downpour. Victor was still standing in the yard, his back to us, when Leo stopped right in front of him. Giant Vic. Victor stiffened. He turned around slowly, his movements sluggish with exhaustion. When he saw Leo, his face did not look like a Don's. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He dropped to his knees in the mud. His expensive clothes ruined his face, smeared with rain and blood. "Leo." He rasped, his voice sounding like gravel being ground together. You should not be out here. Go inside. It is not, I am not." Leo did not listen. He popped open his tiny blue umbrella, clumsily shielding Victor from the rain, then reached out and placed a small, warm hand on Victor's bruised, bleeding knuckles. "Do not cry, Giant Vic," Leo said, his voice serious and sweet. "Leo protects you now." I felt the last of my resolve shatter. The "do not touch" rule the Mafia monster labeled the fear of the blood-soaked past. It all dissolved into the mud at their feet. I walked down the porch steps, my boots sinking into the wet earth, and reached them in 3 strides. I did not say a word. I just grabbed Victor by the arm and hauled him up. He was heavy, trembling with cold and adrenaline, but he did not resist. He looked at me, his dark eyes wide and searching, filled with a raw vulnerability that was more dangerous than any weapon he had ever held. "You should not have come out here," he whispered, looking at Leo, then at me. "I am not clean, Julian." "No," I said, my voice firm despite the shivers racking my body. "You are a mess. You are a disaster, and you are bleeding all over my lawn." I grabbed his hand, the one Leo had been holding, and led them both toward the house. Inside the living room was warm and quiet. I shoved Victor onto a kitchen stool and went into the utility room, grabbing my medical kit. I worked in silence, my surgeon's hands moving with familiar efficiency, cleaning the cuts on his knuckles, the scrape on his cheek, the bruises blooming on his chest. Victor sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving me. He did not wince, he did not complain. He just watched, his expression one of reverence, as if I were stitching his soul back together instead of just his skin. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, his voice low. I paused, a piece of sterile gauze in my hand, and looked up at him. "Because I do not want to live in a world where you are not here, Victor, even if the world you come from scares the hell out of me." Victor's gaze flickered. A flicker of hope, wild, unrefined, and painfully bright, ignited in his eyes. He leaned forward, his hands now clean and bandaged, resting on the edge of the counter. "I have already begun the transfer of power," he said, his voice steadying. "The syndicate is being dissolved, liquidated into a security firm. I am stepping down. I am erasing every trace of the life that made you run." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine with a desperation I had never seen before. "I know I cannot wash away the blood I have already spilled. I know I cannot undo the fear I caused you. But if I strip everything away, the empire, the violence, the past, if I try to be the man who is worthy of this, of you and Leo." He reached out his fingers, grazing my wrist, a gentle trembling touch. "If I wash clean, Julian, will you bet your life on me? Will you trust me to be the man you deserve?" I did not answer right away. I looked at the man who had been a nightmare, a monster, and an accidental father. I looked at his bandaged hands, the same hands that had been gentle with Leo, and I realized that I had already placed my bet. I had placed it the moment I decided to save him in that clinic 4 years ago. "I do not need you to be clean," I whispered, reaching out to cup his face. "I just need you to be present." Autumn in Maine is a riot of colors, painting the world in violent shades of crimson gold and burnt orange. By November, the coastal winds grew sharp, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the cold. Victor had kept his word. True to his promise, in the reign he had systematically dismantled his empire. The Romano syndicate was liquidated, the blood money legally laundered through a maze of corporate restructuring and reborn as Romano Global Security, a legitimate high-tier cybersecurity and private defense firm. He traded his intimidating black mobster suits for navy blazers. He traded his weapons for a laptop. He was trying every single day to be the man he promised he would be. But small towns have long memories and sharp tongues. As Victor began setting up a local branch of his firm in Havenbrook, the whispers started. The scars on his face, his towering, menacing presence, and rumors of his New York past spread like wildfire through the grocery store aisles and parent-teacher meetings. They did not know the whole truth, but they knew enough to be afraid. Parents started pulling their kids away from the swings when Victor brought Leo to the park. The barista at the local cafe handed him his coffee with trembling hands. Victor bore it all in silence. The man who used to break jaws for a disrespectful glance now swallowed the town's prejudice without a single complaint. He thought he deserved it. He thought it was his penance. I, on the other hand, had entirely run out of patience. It culminated at the monthly town hall meeting. The agenda included a vote on the zoning permit for Victor's new office building. The community center was packed. I sat in the second row, holding Leo on my lap while Victor sat beside me, his broad shoulders unusually tense. When the floor opened for discussion, Mrs. Gable, the town's unofficial gossip matriarch, marched to the microphone. "We are a peaceful community," she announced, glaring pointedly at Victor. "We do not need a man with a questionable background bringing his big city violence here. Look at those scars. A leopard does not change its spots. Permitting his security business is an invitation to criminals." I motioned to deny the permit. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I looked at Victor. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed firmly on the wooden floor. He was preparing to surrender. He was going to stand up, withdraw his application, and retreat into the shadows just to keep the peace. Not on my watch. I handed Leo to Victor, ignoring his startled look, and stood up. The room went dead silent. In Havenbrook, I was not just a resident, I was Dr. Hayes. I had delivered their babies, set their broken bones, and held their hands in the trauma ward. My word carried weight. I walked to the front of the room, turning to face the crowd. "Mrs. Gable," I started, my voice ringing out clear and steady. "Do you remember last winter when your husband had a heart attack during the blizzard and the ambulance could not get through the snow?" She blinked, taken aback. "Yes, but what does that mean?" "I drove my truck through 3 feet of snow to get to him," I interrupted. "But I did not plow the road myself. Victor did. He spent 4 hours in a snowplow, clearing the route to your house before you even knew his name." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the people who had been whispering. "You see scars," I said, my voice fiercely protective. "You see a man you do not understand. I see the man who reads bedtime stories to my son. I see a man who walked away from an empire because he wanted to be a good father. He is not bringing violence to this town. He is the reason violence will never touch us." I turned slightly, pointing a finger at the council members. "If you deny his permit based on baseless prejudice, you will need to find yourselves a new chief physician, because where he goes, my son and I go." The silence in the community center was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I did not wait for the vote. I walked back, grabbed Victor's massive hand, hoisted Leo onto my hip, and walked out of the building. The crisp autumn air hit us as we walked the 2 blocks back to the clinic. Victor had not said a word. When we reached the old massive oak tree behind the clinic's garden, he suddenly stopped. "You should not have done that," Victor said, his voice thick with an emotion I could not quite name. "Julian, you put your entire reputation on the line for a former mobster." "I put it on the line for my partner," I corrected, turning to face him. "Get used to it." Victor stared at me. The sunlight was fading, casting a golden glow over his rugged features. He looked at me with a reverence that took my breath away. Slowly, deliberately, the 6'4" ex-Mafia boss dropped to one knee in the fallen autumn leaves. My heart did a spectacular flip. "Oh, Victor," I breathed out. He did not pull out a velvet box. He did not have a diamond ring. Instead, his large scarred hand reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out the battered, duct-taped copy of What to Expect When You Are Expecting. He looked up at me, his dark eyes shining. "I do not have a ring, Julian. I did not know how to do this. I've spent my life signing death warrants and extortion contracts. I've never asked for something I was not prepared to take by force." He opened the book, flipping to the very last page, which was covered in his neat, sharp handwriting. "But I know how to make a vow." He continued, his voice rough but incredibly steady. "I promise to never bring the dark to your doorstep. I promise to be the man you defended in that room today. I promise to always buy the right stage of formula." He held out the open book toward me. On the final page, written in black ink, were the words, "Ultimate mission, protect Julian and Leo forever. Status, awaiting approval." I stared at the words, a laugh breaking through a sob that had lodged in my throat. It was the most ridiculous, unromantic, deeply profound proposal in the history of the world. It was perfectly entirely him. I reached into the breast pocket of my medical coat and pulled out my blue click-top clinic pen. I clicked it with my thumb, the sound sharp, in the quiet garden. I leaned down, taking the book from his trembling hands, and wrote one single word beneath his status line: "Approved." I signed my name, Dr. Julian Hayes, right next to it. "You are a maniac," I whispered, dropping the pen into the leaves and throwing my arms around his neck. Victor let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a groan. He stood up, burying his hands in my hair, and pulled me into a kiss. It was not gentle. It was desperate, fierce, and tasting of salt water and the promise of forever. The barriers, the past, the fears, they all vanished beneath the old oak tree, leaving only the doctor, the monster who became a man, and the little boy chasing autumn leaves around our legs. 2 years later, the rustic log cabin and my small house were permanently joined by a beautiful sunlit glass walkway. But more importantly, the two fragmented, broken lives that resided within them had been entirely forged into one. Time has a funny way of smoothing out the sharpest edges of our trauma. I used to be a man who slept with one eye open, a man who kept a packed duffel bag under the bed, just in case the world decided I was a burden again. Last spring, I finally unpacked that bag. I did not need it anymore. I had found a fortress that no nightmare could breach, and its name was Victor Romano. The transformation of the former Mafia Don into a suburban stay-at-home dad who occasionally ran a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm from his laptop was nothing short of miraculous. It was a brisk Tuesday evening. I walked into the kitchen after a grueling 12-hour shift at the clinic, shrugging off my heavy coat. The sight that greeted me made all the exhaustion instantly evaporate. Victor was standing by the stove. The man who used to strike terror into the hearts of New York's worst criminals was currently wearing a baby pink apron with the words "Dangerously Good Cook" printed across his massive chest. He was expertly flipping a filet mignon in a cast-iron skillet, a pair of stainless steel tongs held in his scarred hand like a surgical instrument. Sitting at the kitchen island was Leo, now a bright, chaotic 5-year-old. Victor had somehow managed to French braid the hair of Leo's favorite action figure while simultaneously reducing a red wine glaze for the steak. "You are home," Victor said, his sharp ears picking up my footsteps before I even spoke. He turned around, his dark eyes instantly softening. He set the tongs down, wiped his hands on a towel, and crossed the kitchen to wrap me in a suffocatingly warm hug. He kissed the top of my head, breathing in the scent of hospital antiseptic and rain. "You worked through lunch again, did not you, Julian? You promised me you would eat the sandwich I packed." "I ate half of it," I mumbled into his chest, smiling against his soft cashmere sweater. "There was an emergency appendectomy." "Half a sandwich does not sustain a brilliant trauma surgeon," Victor grumbled, guiding me to a bar stool next to Leo. "Sit, eat, let me take care of you." I sat. I watched him plate the food with ridiculous Michelin star precision. I watched Leo babble to him about his day at kindergarten, and I watched Victor listen to every single word with absolute, unwavering focus. This was my family. The orphaned foster kid had finally found a home built by the hands of an ex-mobster. Tonight was special. It was our 2-year wedding anniversary. After Leo finished his dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and was ushered off to the living room to watch cartoons, Victor dimmed the kitchen lights. He poured a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon into 2 crystal glasses and lit a pair of tall white candles on the dining table. Soft jazz drifted from the vintage record player in the corner. The atmosphere was incredibly romantic. The air was thick with the quiet, profound love that we had fought so hard to build. Victor reached across the table, his large, calloused fingers gently wrapping around mine. He looked incredibly handsome in the flickering candlelight, the silver scar on his eyebrow catching the soft glow. 2 years, Dr. Hayes. Victor murmured, his thumb stroking the simple gold band on my left hand. and I still wake up every morning terrified that this is a dream, that I will open my eyes and I will be back in that cold penthouse and you will be gone. I am not going anywhere. Victor, I said softly, squeezing his hand. I am right here. We are right here. He smiled, a genuine, breathtaking smile that melted my heart all over again. He leaned in, his lips inches from mine, his dark eyes filled with absolute devotion. I love you, Julian, more than anything. Victor stopped. His eyes, which had been locked onto mine with intense romantic fervor, suddenly darted to the white wall just over my right shoulder. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Don's posture instantly stiffened. The romantic, soft-spoken husband vanished, replaced in a microsecond by the terrified man I had met on the clinic floor years ago. Julian, Victor whispered, his voice trembling so violently it shook the wine in his glass. Do not move. I frowned, confused by the sudden whiplash. Victor, what is wrong? Is it someone outside? My mind immediately flashed back to the hitmen from years ago. Worse, Victor choked out, his face draining of all color. I slowly turned my head to look over my shoulder. Resting on the pristine white wallpaper about 2 feet away was a cockroach. It was not even a particularly large one. It was just sitting there, twitching its long, gross antennae in the candlelight. Before I could even process the absurdity of the situation, the cockroach did the one thing that no cockroach should ever do. It spread its wings, and it took flight. Oh my God! The scream that erupted from Victor Romano, the former, undisputed king of the New York underworld, was so high-pitched and hysterical it could have shattered glass. In a blur of sheer panic, the 6'4" apex predator completely abandoned his anniversary steak, violently shoved his chair back, and vaulted over the dining table. He knocked over a candlestick and sent a plate of asparagus flying into the air. He did not run away. He lunged directly at me. With a desperate leap, Victor practically climbed into my lap. He wrapped his massive arms around my neck in a chokehold, buried his face into my shoulder, and pulled his long legs up onto the chair with me completely curling into a ball of trembling, heavily muscled terror. Kill it! Victor shrieked into my ear, his heavy frame crushing me against the back of the chair. Julian, melt it! Burn the house down! Where is my gun? Call an airstrike! From the living room, Leo came toddling in, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at the flying bug and then looked at his giant, terrifying father, cowering in my lap like a frightened toddler. Leo pointed a tiny finger at the former Mafia Don and burst into uncontrollable, belly-aching giggles. Giant Vic is a scaredy cat. Giant Vic is scared of a bug. I sat there trapped beneath 220 pounds of whimpering Mafia boss, watching the small cockroach casually land on the kitchen counter. I looked at the ruined asparagus on the floor. I looked at my son, who was laughing so hard he was holding his stomach. A bubble of laughter rose in my own chest, impossible to hold back. It started as a chuckle and quickly devolved into a full-blown, breathless fit of laughter. I was laughing so hard, tears pricked the corners of my eyes. It is not funny. Victor muffled into my neck, refusing to look up. Protect your husband, Julian. Use your medical expertise to euthanize the demon. All right, I've got you, my big, brave Don. I wheezed, patting his broad, shaking back. Still laughing, I managed to reach over, grab a rolled-up medical journal from the island, and with one swift and loud strike, I neutralized the airborne threat. I tossed the magazine into the trash can and wrapped my arms back around the massive, trembling man still clinging to my neck. The jazz music was still playing. The wine was safe. The house was loud, chaotic, and completely absurd. I pressed a kiss to Victor's scarred temple, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. "Nah, the assassin is dead, honey," I whispered into his ear, smiling as Leo ran over to hug our legs. "You are safe now." Victor peeked out from my shoulder, let out a massive sigh of relief, and buried his face back into my neck, grumbling something in Italian about never eating in the kitchen again. I held them both close. I had survived trauma, ran from the Mafia, and somehow ended up with a terrified mobster in an apron and a laughing little boy. It was not the life I had planned. But as I sat there in the wreckage of our anniversary dinner, I knew one thing for absolute certain. It was a perfect, beautiful life, and I would not trade it for the world.